everybody come in? Hi, is the rabbi?
I think they're out.
No, can't hear.
Can't hear.
Yeah, you can hear you.
Oh, you can't hear me? Is that better? Okay. I'm just waiting for the rabbi. Hi, Rabbi. Yeah, we're good. Okay, thank you so much for coming. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this discussion of global anti-Semitism and the war in Israel. To kick off tonight's program, Rabbi Randy Maznitsky is going to lead us in prayer.
First of all, good evening, everyone, and thank you for being with us, and a very special thank you to our adult learning who, in a way, we could not have planned this in any different way to have you here, Linda. We're very grateful by your presence, and I know you will be getting a much-deserved introduction. But while we are seated in the sanctuary, I think it's important that we remember in prayer what joins us together. A prayer for Israel in this time of war. God, our strength and protection, we pray for the state of Israel in this devastating time of war, shock, and grief. Our hearts are breaking, O God. We pray for the lives of the innocent civilians who have been heartlessly kidnapped by Hamas. Bring them home and watch over them, God. We pray for the lives of the soldiers who have been taken captive. We pray for their safe return. Shelter them, O God. We pray for the souls of the innocent victims who were brutally slaughtered. Send comfort and strength, God, to the grieving. Send healing to the injured and strength and wisdom to their doctors and nurses. We pray for all our brothers and sisters in Israel in this time of tragedy and crisis. Watch over Israel, O God, and spread your shelter of peace over the land and over all our brothers and sisters who live there. Shine your light upon Israel's leaders, officers, and advisors. Innocent blood is calling out to them to overcome all divisiveness and to act with clarity and determination. Protect the men and women who defend Israel. Let them be safe, and may they be victorious over the Hamas terrorists who attacked our people. Watch over them, God, and hear their prayers. Bring peace, O God. Let it rain down from the heavens like a mighty storm. Let it wash away all hatred and bloodshed. Peace, God, please. God of the brokenhearted, God of the living, God of the dead, gather the souls of the victims in your eternal shelter. Let them find peace in your presence. Their lives have ended. May their lights never be extinguished. May they shine on us always and illuminate our way, as we all say.
Amen. Thank you. I'm so grateful that we can all come together as a community, especially with all the events that have been going on. And I think we're all here to share our concerns and to become a little bit better informed, perhaps, and also just to be able to air our questions in a safe space. I'm Shelley Young. Most of you know me. I'm head of adult engagement at the Temple. And this program is part of our speaker series, which was developed in partnership with Rabbi Randy Maznitsky and Lynn Ann Cutler, our Director of Congregational Learning. I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Linda Scherzer. She's a former Mideast correspondent for CNN and covered the first Palestinian uprising, the Gulf War, and the Oslo Accords. Linda is the recipient of 5 Associated Press Broadcasting Awards, and her CNN team received a Cable Ace Award for distinguished coverage of the Gulf War. Since 2016, Linda has been the director of the Jewish Community Relations Committee of the Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West, which I learned is the 8th largest federation in the United States. The JCRC is the Government Relations and Israel Advocacy wing of the Jewish Federation. The JCRC is engaged in efforts to combat anti-Semitism and racism. Linda is also the director of a program called Right On for Israel, New York, a program that prepares Jewish high school students to combat anti-Semitism and extremist anti-Israel activity on college campus. Linda received her master's in journalism from Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism and her undergraduate degree from Brandeis in Massachusetts. She lives in New Jersey with her husband and 3 children. I just want to say that given Linda's knowledge and experience, we're just so lucky to have her here. And it's such a terrifying time of global anti-Semitism, and Linda can speak to some of the causes and perhaps help us with knowing what we can do about it. I've developed a set of questions for Linda to cover some of the areas we're all concerned about, but we want to hear from all of you. So I'll kick off with some questions, and then afterwards I'll turn it over to you guys. Linda, welcome to Temple HaShalom.
Thank you, Shelley.
We're so grateful that you made the time to come to us and give us your knowledge and your energy and your insights and your thoughts. We really appreciate it. I believe we all are worried about the world is changing so quickly in the past 2 weeks and trying to grapple with all of the many issues, some of which are right here in the United States. So before, or as we get started, we'd love to know more about you. Can you share with us how you became interested in Israel and events in the Middle East?
Well, first, thank you, Shelley, for inviting me. Rabbi, it's good to see you, and hello, everybody. I really am comforted, actually, to be with you this evening. I'm comforted to be in the presence of my Jewish community everywhere I go right now, because the events of the last 12 days have been just so atrocious and unprecedented and traumatic for all of us, and it gives me strength and comfort to be here. This was planned actually before. You had the foresight, Shelley, to invite me before the events of October 7th, but I really do feel lucky to be with you tonight. And I'm going to try to the best of my ability, because even with my experience, the years spent on the front lines in the Middle East, my current professional career working to combat anti-Semitism in our communities, to be perfectly honest, I'm at a loss. I really am at a loss to explain how we are where we are today, 75 years, 80 years after the Holocaust, to return to the dark days of brutality and savagery and evil that we witnessed a week ago Saturday morning. And to see the reaction, the response of the world, most troublingly, in many cases, what's happening on our college campuses, and we'll get to that in a little while. So let me answer what is the softball question, I guess. How did I get here today? To be honest with you, the only reason that I am here today is because at the not so tender age of about 24, I picked up a book that I think all of you know and perhaps read, and that was Leon Uris's Exodus. And I did go to Brandeis University. I had nothing to do with Hillel. I was a Hebrew school dropout. Rabbi apologized for that, but I really, by my late teens, had no real connection to my Judaism, to my community, certainly not to the state of Israel. I had never visited, but somehow that book landed in my hands. And I was captivated by the story of the survivors of the Holocaust and those that had, fought and made their way to what was then Palestine and built this country. And I wanted to see what that country looked like from the inside. I joined at the time, and this is, I'm dating myself certainly, but this is back in 1987. I joined a UJA singles mission to Israel. It was my first time there. Much to my mother's chagrin, I did not fall in love with the Americans on the tour bus with me. I fell in love at the time with my Israeli tour guide. And I know that any of you who have been on that bus know exactly, women, I think I'm speaking to, know exactly what I'm talking about. But I did something that most people don't do. By the way, I did marry an Israeli, wasn't the tour guide, but because, or partly because of that man, and my fascination with the country, I went back a year later. The year was 1988. It was the start of the Palestinian uprising. CNN was only 8 years old at the time, and I got my lucky break. I mean, I had been until that time a reporter for an NBC affiliate in Burlington, Vermont. Not exactly the kind of experience that prepares one to cover a war and the biggest story on the planet, but CNN, gave me a big break. And I ended up spending the next 8 years there. And I became very attached to the country and to my Judaism. And so when CNN wanted me to leave, I decided I didn't want to leave. I stayed in Israel for several more years, working for Israel Television. And when I came back to the United States, joined the synagogue. When I got married, we sent our children to Jewish day school. And it really, that experience in Israel really forged the trajectory of the rest of my life. And that's really why I'm here today.
That's great, thank you. We're talking about, your love for Israel, and perhaps this conflict has raised a red flag with regard to the degree of anti-Zionism there is in the world, but also in America, that some of us, myself included, weren't kind of aware of. So we talk about this at the temple a lot, whether or not anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, and we certainly see that now. So I just wanted to know your opinion. I know on the phone we said anti-Zionism could lead to anti-Semitism, but I'm wondering now if anti-Zionism is just a manifestation of anti-Semitism, or if this is really just semantics.
So it's the 21st manifestation of anti-Semitism. I mean, to be an anti-Zionist is to deny a core piece of our Jewish identity, our desire as a nation to return to the ancestral homeland of our people, a land that always had a Jewish presence in spite of the exile of the Jewish people after the destruction of the first and second temples. There has always been a Jewish presence in that land. And so to deny that this is part of our national identity, our history, our very being as Jews, is I think in the view of all of us sitting here, certainly mine, that is akin to anti-Semitism. And the resulting delegitimization and the double standards that have been applied to Israel, the only Jewish state on the face of this earth, that is a manifestation of anti-Semitism.
So I have a quote actually from an article that I just read, and it kind of bridges the anti-Zionism with what's going on at college campuses. So this is a professor actually from Harvard, and she wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal earlier this week. And what she says is, how did this depraved ideology, and she's talking about anti-Zionism, penetrate America's universities, its elites, and even the US Congress to a degree that the German Bund in the 1930s never found possible? How did the idea of eliminating Israel galvanize the intersectional coalition of our disaffected minorities?
Excuse me, Shelley, I still can't hear your question. Can you move the microphone?
Sure, I'm sorry. Oh, that is better. Sorry about that. So this was in the Wall Street Journal, and I'll read it again. I hope you'll all be patient. So this woman is a professor at Harvard, and what she wrote, it's a really long article, but I just took out this one piece. She said, How did this depraved ideology, and she's talking about anti-Zionism, penetrate America's universities, its elites, and even the US Congress to a degree that the German Bund in the 1930s never found possible? How did the idea of eliminating Israel galvanize the intersectional coalition of our disaffected minorities? So, having said that, I really would love to get your insights into what's going on college campuses. We're all reading about the events that happened at Harvard, and I think Berkeley and other schools. Can you help us understand what's going on and why anti-Zionism is tolerated? Why are pro-Palestinian groups allowed to publicly air their anti-Israel rhetoric? And why are these bright young people at schools like Harvard so quick to condemn and denounce Israel? And why isn't anyone reining in these comments? How can we say that's not acceptable?
Yeah, it's a wonderful and perplexing and disturbing question. And I have no doubt that if you, hey Gary, actually Gary Taffet and I went to college together, but back in the day it was about apartheid South Africa, and that has been applied, the idea that Israel is an apartheid state, which is a gross distortion of what Israel is about, seems to be an acceptable mantra on the part of far too many college students today. I've seen, based on the work that I'm doing that Shelley referred to for the last 22 years, I was the founding director of a program back at the beginning of the Second Intifada, when Israel, as you'll recall, was being impacted by what was, if not daily, weekly, horrific suicide bombings where buses and discotheques and restaurants were exploding, were being targeted in the heart of Israeli cities, right? And it was horrific. Most people don't remember it. Certainly the generation of students who are on college campuses today have they weren't even born. But it was that ugly phenomenon that was carried out by the Hamas and Islamic Jihad, these radical extremists who were bound and determined to break apart the Oslo Accords because they have no interest in a two-state solution. They are fundamentally opposed to the idea of a Jewish presence in the Middle East. And so the best way that they could not just paralyze, but traumatize the Israeli public to a point where this process was not just paused, it was put on ice, was to attack Israelis in the places where they live and work and go to school and board public buses. So that was the backdrop for the program that I started back in the early part of the 21st century in 2002, when we began to see the effect this was having on the college campus, where in the aftermath of these horrific attacks, when the IDF and the Israeli Air Force would naturally exercise their right to self-defense and would hit back, and there were Palestinian fatalities and casualties, and you can imagine, you know what those pictures look like, we're seeing them today. The campuses were starting to roil. They were becoming very charged, and we saw people standing up and advocating for the Palestinian cause, not understanding what this story was really about, but just assuming that Israel, Goliath, Palestinians, David, that you had two very mismatched parties, and the Palestinians were the victims. And so the campuses were starting to get polarized. And Jewish students themselves, some of them were even joining the Palestinian protest movements, but even those who wanted to advocate and stand up for Israel didn't have they didn't have the knowledge, they didn't have the history, they didn't know their own story, they didn't have the confidence, they didn't have the clarity to be able to stand up and make Israel's case. So we started a program, a 2-year program, to teach 40 top students each year, those who were poised for Jewish leadership, those who were going to go out to, to make Israel's case on some of the best campuses in this country. We trained them, we prepared them. Many of them did, in fact, join and become leaders of the pro-Israel community. And it was a drop in the bucket. It's still a drop in the bucket, but that's what we're doing to try and fight back, literally fight back. But at the same time, what we were seeing was the growth of this, the pro-Palestinian Israeli detractors, these people who fiercely believed that the Palestinians were being colonized, that they were the victims of Israeli, historic Israeli oppression, pushed out of their lands by an occupier, who came from the ashes of the Holocaust, but what right did they have to push these people out? So they believed that this was an original sin. The original sin was Israel's creation, and this needed to be fought. And this toxic climate and these factual lies and inaccuracies and omissions for the last 22 years have been literally taking root on the campuses of the universities where your kids and my kids are going to school. And so you point to Congress. Now, I'm happy to say that the squad, and they're loud and they are vicious and vitriolic and disgusting these days, right? Because how can you possibly justify, even if you believe in an original sin, the beheading of babies, the burning of people alive, the rape of teenagers next to the bodies of their friends, the kidnapping of elderly and Holocaust survivors. It is beyond me how warriors for social justice, these human rights activists, can somehow stand up and blame Israel for what just happened. But it's the poison that's been planted for the last 2 decades. A generation has been raised on the most elite campuses in this country, and people in positions of seniority in these administrations on campus who would never allow such demonstrations against, can you imagine the KKK, people masked in hoods demonstrating on college campuses? Can you just substitute any minority or marginalized group for Jews? Would this ever happen? But just when we thought that we had become normalized, we are reminded again that the Jewish people are somehow different. And we get this wake-up call every 75 years, and this is what we are experiencing now. And what you're seeing in Congress with the squad, now, I don't want to exaggerate because I'm not prone to hyperbole, and those, the Rashida Tlaibs and the Ilhan Omars and the AOCs and the Cori Bushes are still a tiny, tiny fraction of the Democratic Party. So I don't want you to think that I am pointing fingers at that party, but I will say that every member of Congress graduated from one of these campuses, right? They're all going to school in this country. They're all listening and and hearing these toxic ideas that are fomenting in these places, in these higher institutions of higher learning. And if we don't, and we are now, we have major donors pushing back at places like the University of Pennsylvania, at Harvard. My son goes to Cornell. I know what's going on there. NYU, we've seen. And corporate America is saying, we don't want these people in our offices. We don't want graduates of NYU Law School interacting with our clients, espousing these kinds of horrific ideas. Good for them, because statements don't matter anymore. Unfortunately, statements, that's old news. What's going to make the difference is that people of goodwill in corporate America, in the law firms in this country, stand up, rescind job offers, create lists of people who have signed on to these absolutely horrific, disgusting statements, and let there be consequences for those actions.
Thank you. I did read recently that, now not all of us are hedge fund billionaires, but he is a alumnus of Harvard, and what he did, I'm sure you know, he got a list of all the names of those people that signed that horrible statement that came out right after the war started. And what he did is he got some kind of a bus or billboard, and he put all their names and their pictures so that they could look up, and it said anti-Semite. I mean, it was just unbelievable. I thought, anyway. So switching gears a little bit, I know we talked about this outside, about the news and how, especially with the bombing of the hospital in Gaza, it got out right away. Oh, Israel bombed a hospital, 500 people are dead. And then it was like, no, that's not what happened. And in the meantime, everybody's reacting to that, and there's riots and violence. And so what can we do to make sure that the true news is getting out, that there's no fake stories that are meant to sway world opinion against Jews?
So, we have an example in the last 48 hours, right, of exactly what you're talking about. And I've been in that position of being the reporter to be fed this kind of information, and a story happens, and every reporter, your colleagues are all kind of accepting the position, that is fed to us by, in the interests of what we consider to be balanced journalism. We are hearing from the health ministry in Gaza, and we're putting stock in that story, in that position, when frankly we need to demand from our news organizations that they take a breath and consider the credibility of the source, right? We've just witnessed a massacre of 1,300 Israelis. There are more than 200 hostages being held prisoner in circumstances that are unimaginable. And we know that Israeli authorities and the IDF and hospitals, it took days to identify even 500 bodies in Israel after that massacre. How within minutes are you able to say that there are 500 dead in Gaza? We now know, obviously, that we may be talking about dozens of people, however terrible. But it's frustrating. And what do you do? Because there are countless people who are going to cancel their subscription to the New York Times. It's not going to help. But I do think that you have the right and responsibility to phone the Times, not to scream at the New York Times, certainly not the old ladies who may be answering the phone. But if you have connections to people at the New York Times, you need to leverage those connections. At the Times, at the Journal, at CNN, wherever they exist, and demand of our news organizations, particularly today. It was bad enough in my day with a 24-hour news network, but today we've got this. So within seconds, they are reporting information that is a lie, that is halfway around the world. I mean, it's circled the globe many times before it can be verified or rescinded, and the damage has been done. The damage has been done. And so I think we all have to be these activists and warriors in our own right. We have to consider the ways that we can empower ourselves to do this work, to make those calls, to write the emails, to send the letters. It is more crucial today than I can ever remember it.
And on that vein, so we all really want to know what we can do as American Jews to support Israel during this time.
Well, thank you for that question. Look, I come to you as a professional today working. I'm a Jewish professional. I finally embraced that word. Took me a long time, but I finally understood that to be true, that I am a Jewish professional. I work for a federation that is doing enormous good work. And the best way that you can be helping today is to be going to israelemergencyfund.org to support the emergency campaign, 100% of which these dollars are going directly to help Israelis who have, the needs are enormous, enormous. The Jewish Federations of North America is raising $500 million, they're already at $400 million, to do things like provide the tents for the 46 shivas in the town of Ofakim today. Can you imagine 46 families in this town who are all grieving people who have been, who were killed in this massacre? So it goes to pay for tents, it goes to pay for shivas, it goes to pay for burials, for trauma relief, for the evacuation of thousands and thousands of Israelis who were living in the kibbutzim and moshavim and towns. Sderot is one of them, in what's called the Gaza envelope, right close to the southern border. They've been evacuated to hotels, Mitzpeh Ramon, to Jerusalem, and they have no idea, frankly, when they're going back. They don't even know if they will go back. I mean, can you imagine? These are people who have built their lives, raised their families, and where they live, these are literal ghost towns. I mean, they have lost hundreds of people in these places, and they will need, obviously, trauma relief, mental health counseling. They need food, shelter, clothing. I mean, many of them are starting from scratch. So the needs are enormous, and I would urge you to please consider making a donation to the Israel Emergency Fund and to the UJA annual campaign, because the campaign funds allocated immediately $1 million to help we have close personal partnerships with Ofakim, Merchavim, Kibbutz Erez. These are, again, the southern kibbutzim and towns. And we put money away every year into, this emergency fund for moments like this. $1 million is a large amount of money, even for a federation like this, and we need to replenish that fund. And so there are two places that you can donate, either the emergency fund directly or the annual campaign. When you contribute to the annual campaign, there's a 1-to-1 match, so your dollars are doubled, which is also a nice thing. There are other places, but I would urge you, I know there have been independent appeals to help IDF units. There are humanitarian efforts to, people are literally dropping off diapers and all kinds of goods that have been put into duffel bags and sent to Israel. That's a wonderful thing. Intentions are great. We're even talking about batteries for soldiers, air pad, whatever it is, and ceramic vests. That, however well-intentioned, there are huge logistical issues getting those things once they're in Israel with the paperwork, many of these items don't meet the requirements that the Army has determined for their soldiers, so they're just lying in storehouses. So the best way for you to support this, the Israel public and the war effort, quite frankly, is through your UJA donations.
Thank you. We will be making, the temple will be making a donation to the Israel the Israel Emergency Fund. So thank you for that information, and I guess we can put that on our website too. So I don't want to hog up all the time, but this has been so educational and really interesting to put all the pieces together. I want to toss it back to the audience, and if you have a question, just raise your hand, stand up.
Iran seems to be the wild card right now, and it looks like they're getting all riled, making what are now empty threats. How are they going to factor into this? Are they going to, in your opinion, are they going to follow through with their threats?
I mean, it depends what you mean by threats. The most obvious, and I suppose, the threat that will not assure mutual assured destruction, assuming that they really do have access to a nuclear capability, would be to activate their proxy army in the north, the Hezbollah.
Right.
Iranian, backed and financed and trained and supported. That is a fierce force. That is also a wild card. They have been, shooting across the bow, like they have been engaging Israel's forces. They have 150,000 missiles that are poised at Israel. It is it's a scary and dangerous proposition should they choose to engage. Beyond that, obviously, there's there's the West Bank. There are real pockets that pose enormous challenge. Would Iran directly get into this war? I mean, that's why the Biden administration sent two warships right into the area, because of that fear. Hopefully, that sent a strong enough message. The president is speaking tonight. I'm assuming that he's talking about Israel and Ukraine, and I'm assuming the military support and what he's continuing to send to Israel. I hope that is enough of a deterrent, but I think it's anyone's guess at this point.
And it was going to be a two-part, because you did mention the West Bank, and for the most part, I've read about some minor instances in the West Bank over the past couple of days, but overall, it seems to be fairly quiet so far.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's all, I'm not a military analyst. It's been many years since I've been on the front lines. Nobody saw, obviously, they didn't see this coming. And the state of Israel doesn't, there's no precedent for what just happened. This is, what occurred, what happened on that Saturday morning on October 7th is unprecedented in Israeli history. And it was years, I've read months, but possibly years in the making. Clearly, the Hamas strategists and the people sitting in Tehran know what Israel's response is going to be. Are they planning to open up a second and a third front, in the north? Are they going for broke here? Maybe. I don't think anyone can possibly know, at least not those of us sitting here, but it's sufficiently dangerous that there are 360,000 Israeli soldiers who are poised, some of whom are about to go into Gaza, others who are in the north, others who are on the West Bank, others who are preparing for possible violence within Israel proper, as we saw during the last incursion. When was that? 2018, 19? It's really anyone's guess at the moment. My only and last thing I'm going to say is that I reached out. I mean, words of comfort. I reached out to a dear friend of mine from my CNN days. I actually do keep in touch with many of the thought leaders in Israel and the military correspondents. Alon Ben David, who happens, I actually am bringing him to speak by Zoom next week, Wednesday, 5 o'clock, our time. So you should look out for that email because he's someone, if you have the time, worth listening to. When I wrote him immediately, sending my thoughts and prayers and hoping that he and his family are okay. I mean, he wrote back saying, these are very difficult days, but we shall prevail. We will prevail. I think morale is very high in the Army. They're ready and itching to go in. And it is unimaginable to me to think that anything but not just victory, but a reestablishment of Israeli deterrence, which kept our enemies at bay for so many years, will not be reestablished.
David?
So it seems like the root cause of these terrible activities on these campuses is ignorance and anti-Semitism, right? Or some sort of combination of the two. As a journalist, what do you see as the root cause of this terrible reporting we're seeing? What's going on? Why are these narratives, why does it take them, 5 days to get the story about why are they so flat-footed? Why don't they, do their jobs?
So I used to get, it's a great question, and it's a troubling question, and I have pondered this question for many, many years, particularly after my own reporting, when I would come back and face audiences in, the bad old days of the first and second intifadas. Why does the press seem to be so biased against us? And I think there's something, look, some reporters just don't like Israelis. I don't know that it's American reporters necessarily. I think the British, in my day, I see the guy, I can name the guy. I know he didn't like, Israelis, he didn't like Jews. No surprise that anti-Semitism is alive and well in England, and he unfortunately was reporting for the BBC, and much of his reporting was just really bad. But I don't think that is what drives bad reporting in the press corps, the American press corps. I think there's just there are instinctively, as we apply the tools of our craft, there's sort of an understanding. There's supposed to be balance and objectivity, and we're not supposed to say that one side is good and one side is bad, and there's suffering on both sides, and you've got to explore that suffering, and these compelling pictures often drive the story regardless of what you're going to say. You see buildings that are flattened in Gaza, and people that are homeless, and babies that are killed, and it's very hard not to ask the questions that journalists are supposed to ask, I guess. What happened with this hospital, though, is a good example of how we need to hold reporters accountable for the information that they are communicating, because this is life and death. These stories can lead to people getting killed. We saw the way that story incited mobs, in Australia, calling on, people to gas the Jews. And listen, it led to the cancellation of Biden meeting with, Jordan's King Abdullah and and Egypt's, Egypt's president, I mean, there are real-life consequences. But are they driven by sheer anti-Semitism, or I don't think so. I don't think so. We have to, we have to ask those tough questions. Sometimes it makes us look bad, but they need to be asked. And but I will say, sitting on the other side of the television screen now, I feel the same way you do. I do.
I don't know your name, sorry.
Through Federation, there was a Peoplehood Project. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I am.
Rabbi Wisniewski recruited me to be on that project a few years back. And if people don't know, 10 Israelis from the Gaza area came to stay with 10 New Jersey families, and then we went over there, and then we all went to Athens the following year. One of the guys in my cohort got killed Saturday morning.
Is that Igal? Oh, Iluz?
Yeah. And I've been down there, I've been to Israel like 7 times, and there's been all these skirmishes through the years with Hamas and everything, and this is the first time it was really personal. And my sister is very active in JNS. She's the chair of the Gaza Envelope area, and they built bomb shelters and the indoor playground in Sderot, and she had 2 friends get killed, and she's very good friends with people in the kibbutz on the border. And I read their Facebook posts, and they are very defiant, which is, if you know what they went through, it's amazing. But my questions are, you see all these humongous Palestinian protests going on. I don't know whether it's a function of the left-wing liberal media, mainstream media, or they're really that big and there's so many of them. Where's the Israeli humongous rally? Why are we not organizing something, on Fifth Avenue or something like that?
Well,
And 1 second,
yeah.
one more question. I guess mostly the West Bank situation, or never mind. Israel as a whole, it's always been accused of being an apartheid state. Is that just because we're building settlements in the West Bank and the Palestinian movements are so restricted there, or because the people that are talking about it now weren't around, like you said, back in, when the origins of all this took place. So how do you respond to somebody who says that?
That settlements are the root of the problem, that Israel's is disingenuous in talking about wanting to create a 2-state solution and continuing to build up settlements. Yeah, there's something to that. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that everything that Israel has done over the last 50 years, since 50 plus years since the occupation, since the 6-Day War, and Israel came to acquire these territories, has all been right and righteous. No, I don't think so. And I think we have to have the courage to say that. But
Is that where the accusation comes from, though, the apartheid state?
people don't know what they're talking about. They really don't. I mean, because you've got a country with an Arab population. I mean, within Israel proper. Look, the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, there's a different administration of those territories, and the history and the future of those territories, particularly what's happened over the last 30 years since the Oslo process began, that's a conversation in and of itself. But when people are accusing Israel of being an apartheid state, and you consider that in this country, Israeli Arabs vote, Israeli Arabs serve in the Knesset, in Israel's parliament, there's Israeli Arab serving on the Supreme Court, Israeli Arabs go to the finest universities in the country, Israeli Arabs serve in every sector of society. It is a complete fallacy.
Still a Jewish majority, correct?
In the state of Israel, it is a Jewish majority, and in Israel, the minority is, just like in Arab nations, there is a Jewish minority, or there used to be a Jewish minority. In the one and only Jewish state on the planet, Arabs are the minority, correct. But they, and I'm not going to say that in every possible way do they get the kinds of, allocations and advantages that Israeli Jews do. We still have a ways to go before there's, complete social equity in this country. But to suggest that Israel is an apartheid state a la South Africa just go and ask those who, black South Africans, what their lives look like. I mean, there's absolutely no, parity between those two situations. Let me, because there may be other questions, I'll just take the first part of, or the first question that you asked about where are the demonstrations of the pro-Israel community. There are many of them, actually. They marched in New York City. There was at least one or two rallies that I'm aware of in New York City. There was a rally that the Federation put together on Sunday, the day after the massacre. We had 2,200 people at a synagogue in Melbourne Short Hills. Almost every night of the week, there are,
Their coverage in the media. Otherwise, we would know about them.
I mean, that may be true. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I'm so busy. I'm not following local news or seeing exactly what's happening in our communities. But I do know I saw a video that was put out by the Jewish Federations of North America. Within the first week, there were 120 communities around the country that had pro-Israel marches and rallies and solidarity events. So I can say pretty unequivocally that the Jewish community has rallied in a way that I don't think, certainly we haven't seen since the Yom Kippur War, 1967. Globally, the Jewish community is coming together in a way that we haven't seen, certainly not in mine.
I heard about the one at the UN, knew about the one at Jeshurun, but you won't see it on 7 o'clock, 11 o'clock news like you see 8 million Palestinians in Queens last night or whatever it was.
So they showed it. They have the mayor from Jordan.
I saw him, but he didn't show who he was talking to.
Let me say something else, because in my work is, my bread and butter is government relations, and a big part of what I've been doing these last 12 days has been shoring up support, making sure that we have solid support within our New Jersey congressional delegation, in Trenton. The governor, I was literally texting with him when this happened. He could not be more supportive. The Attorney General, New Jersey Attorney General, was at our event in Short Hills. We had 2 members of Congress and a third who sent somebody. And I've been spending the last number of days getting local mayors and state legislators to sign on to a statement that says that they stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel and with the Jewish community. So I feel, and you should too, I think, feel very gratified that in spite of these ugly voices that we're hearing on campus, that our elected leaders are really standing shoulder to shoulder with us. So,
I think, I know you're saying that our leaders are saying that, but I'm not seeing it on TV or in the news. I mean, when George Floyd was killed, like, the media was falling all over themselves to broadcast it and comment on it. Universities were apologizing. And this is like, Israel, Jews are just scapegoats. It's like, well, it's only the Jews. It's all, to me, like, very low key.
I'm going to say what I used to say back in the day, which is that, maybe you are watching the news, constantly, but if you're not, I think it's hard to see everything that's out there. There's so many channels, there are so many sources of information. I mean, I get most of my information these days like online, and I'm not watching the networks. I don't have time, frankly, to watch the networks every day, all day. I mean, I said before, I went on record saying, the world looks at us differently. I don't think that we have ever quite fit in. I think that, sadly, anti-Semitism, which is what I came to talk about today before we got distracted by what's going on in the Middle East, is sadly a part of the human condition. I've come to that conclusion. It is part of the human condition for reasons I don't really understand. I don't know that anybody fully understands. Yes, most of us are white. I think we're looked at as hyper-privileged. And, you know, jealousy plays into it in some ways. And for whatever reasons, you know, we are not looked at like any other minority group. We're not. And I don't know, Gary, if you wanted to.
Well, I was particularly struck by the fact that on October 7th, the horrific events of October 7th, much of the peace camp resided in that neighborhood. Many of the people who lived on those people scene are people who support the Gazans.
Yep.
I was struck by one particular individual of the 1,300 murdered so horrifically. Vivian Silver, maybe you know the name, she's from Canada, 74 years old. Her raison d'etre was to drive ill Gazans to Israeli hospitals so they can get better care.
Yep.
I think this has set the peace prospects back 20 years. This is 9/11 on steroids. You know, if you think about the population, Israel vis-a-vis America, it's like 40,000, as you know, 40,000 Americans would be killed on equivalent. So these are the people who, in the Gazans camp, they support the Gazans. These settlements are not the problem. You know, that's a canard. It's the existence of Israel that's the problem. And it's very tough for American Jews to come to grips with that, oh, if only the settlements were disbanded, or maybe the Israelis reached out more, and Netanyahu would be more conciliatory. It's not. It's the existence of Israel, and it's hard to come to grips with the fact that more than else, I can remember grandparents said the world hates Jews. You know, you don't want to believe that, but it's true. They hate Jews. Now you say I'm anti-Zionist. Oh, not an anti-Semite. I'm anti-Zionist. No, you're anti-Semite.
Yeah.
And it's true. And this has set back the prospects for peace for generation. Because there'll never be any trust.
Yeah. I agree with you 98%. The only issue that I take is the word they, because I have to make distinctions between those Palestinian radical fundamentalist extremists who are ideologically driven, who are disciplined in everything that they do, and their refusal to accept the idea of a Jewish presence. For them, it is blasphemy. It's religiously unacceptable, and they are fiercely dedicated to the idea of driving Jews out of the region. They believe that Jews have occupied sacred land. They want to create not just a Palestinian state, but a caliphate, a state that is driven by religious principles where women are cloaked in their hijabs. And I mean, I didn't live among them, but I existed and covered them long enough to kind of see and absorb that ideology, which of course is is hard for my ears to hear, but it is a fundamental premise upon which this group exists. I make a distinction between them and many hundreds of thousands of other Palestinians who simply want to wake up in the morning, send their kids to school, and go to work, who frankly are victimized and terrorized by these Hamas terrorists themselves. They are. And it's easy to assign blame to all of them. You know, part of me, after what happened, you know, so incensed, so traumatized by what we're seeing, just wipe them all out, you know, make Gaza into a parking lot. Forget about mowing the lawn, mowing the grass every few years, which is what they talked about in the ways that they got rid of the worst of the terrorists. Just, they want to eliminate Hamas. Let's do it without another Israeli dying. But we can't do that. Our moral, our ethical standards won't allow it, and the world will not allow it. So our soldiers are going to be put in harm's way again, and God willing, they will prevail and they will be victorious. But it's very, 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 very complex, for sure. And the last thing I was going to say, because this idea, and I don't want to forget it. I mean, what just happened is going to have a formative impact on our children, on our grandchildren, on a generation of Jews who grew up thinking that Israel could only be victorious. Israel has an Iron Dome, all the missiles that are fired. Israel is protected. Israel is the dominant military power. Israel always wins. Our children now know what we learned, you know, in previous generations, which is that the Jewish people will not know peace on this earth for a long time. The kind of privileged existence that they experienced as young people is no longer. We've been scarred, some of us worse than others, but the psychological impact on us and our children, I think, will be felt for as long as we live and for generations to come.
I want to interject something that we haven't brought up, and that's about Netanyahu. And I don't know if this is the third rail that we shouldn't talk about, but it appears that this problem has existed for a long time, and that he was reluctant to do any kind of military intervention. Like you said, they would mow the grass occasionally, but not, not do anything more, I guess I could say, proactive. And I'm just wondering how he will be thought of in history, like, you know, what he did and did not do, and what you think about that.
I mean, he is going to go down in history as the man who led this country at the moment of its greatest tragedy, its greatest. That is how he will go down in history. Listen, I'll be honest with you. I knew the man. I know the man. I never liked him. His arrogance, certainly the government that he put together last year. And all of the trauma and division that was inflicted on Israel as he pursued this, you know, changing of the way that government is supposed to operate in Israel. I mean, I'm not going to go down that path, but those of you who have been following the judicial overhaul, the judicial coup, the judicial reform that he was trying to shove down the throats of this country, and the hundreds of thousands that came out week after week after week to oppose this, and the radical extreme government that he put together of racists and outcasts and a man who was deemed too extreme to be allowed to draft into the IDF when he was of Army age, and the homophobic comments made by another one of his ministers. I mean, it was a train wreck, actually. And we were all distracted. He was distracted, obviously, by getting that legislation passed, never realizing there would be that kind of opposition. The corruption charges, obviously, that hung over his head. He was distracted by all of that, and I think we were all distracted by the success of this startup nation, right? We were finally, it seemed, a normal nation, operating like any other country, in a bad neighborhood, but in a region where Israel miraculously now had relationships with, with the UAE, with Morocco, with, I mean, who would have thought? And we were on the road to seal a deal with, of all places, all countries, Saudi Arabia. I mean, this was, the kind of normalization that we only could dream of, and who cared about the Palestinians? I mean, the major players in the region had accepted the existence of this country. And so we were lured, I guess, or so, everyone thinks, we were lured into this perception that the troubles of the past were behind us. And this was a massive intelligence failure. People are going to be losing their jobs. Primarily, I would hope and expect the Prime Minister, his Defense Minister, his Chief of Intelligence, the head of the Shin Bet. This is all speculation, but when these things happen in Israel, there are major, after the war is over, there are going to be major commissions of inquiry. And Israelis expect that those at the top, who, this was on their watch, and they were asleep at the wheel, and they will have to go.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. I promised her 1 hour, so I don't want to take up too much of her time. Absolutely. Tell us your name. I don't know who you are. Oh, I thought it was you in the back. I know Debbie.
It's not a question, Nancy Marcel.
Hi, Nancy.
When you were talking about most Palestinians are just like us, the couple that I stayed with on the Peoplehood Project years ago, way before this happened, he said to me, I talked a lot about all this kind of stuff, and he said they have Palestinian coworkers, friends. They're just like us. They want to make a living, raise their family, but until there's a moderate Arab leader that is going to put to end teaching them to hate and kill Jews from birth, it's never going to change. So that backs up what you said.
Well, it does, and actually I said that over many years. When I say we, I'm actually pointing to myself and the international media. In my day, and obviously I'm really dating myself, only Gary knows exactly how old I am, I think, just based on, what year we graduated from Brandeis. I was actually, he was a little ahead of me, right? So I do need to point that out.
I'm only 39, so you must be 36.
Yeah. And now I just lost my train of thought. Remind me the point that you made.
The couple I was staying with, and these are people getting fired at, on a daily basis, and yet they have a favorable opinion towards the everyday, non-fanatical Palestinians. You were saying about the leadership. Until there's a moderate Arab leader who's going to put to end the credo of kill Jews, Arab children.
Yeah, and I totally lost my train of thought. It was a really important point I was going to make too, but it'll come back to me. So,
How they're brought up to hate Jews.
Oh yeah, okay, got it. Thank you, Shelley.
You're
All right,
welcome.
so this is what happens is, I know you all can relate as you age. So I was pointing to myself. I was pointing a finger at myself, and I was pointing a finger at the international media. In my day, when the Oslo Accords were first, when they were signed, when the world, watched this stunning display on the lawn of the White and the Rose Garden, Rabin and Arafat, lifetime enemies coming together, signing an accord, the beauty of that photo op. I mean, we were all distracted, frankly. We were all distracted by that picture, because what continued to happen is exactly what you're talking about. It is that the educational system and the media, Palestinian educational system and Palestinian media, was continuing to perpetuate this idea that Jews were the interlopers, that Jews had stolen their land, that Jews were occupiers. There was no education or culture of teaching peace and reconciliation. And so we shouldn't be surprised a generation or two generations later about what happened, because people who want to achieve, forget about the fact that by the way, what's left out of the conversation are the offers that were made to Palestinian leaders. Extraordinary offers, one even that included East Jerusalem, which I don't even think Israelis would have ultimately agreed to. Nevertheless, offers that were on the table, that were left on the table because Arafat walked away. And Palestinians had agency. They had the ability to forge a different future for themselves. Israel left Gaza in 2005. They handed over sources of income, greenhouses that could have, been thriving businesses, the hundreds of millions of dollars in aid that could have built up their cities, their schools, their hospitals, built bomb shelters, whatever it is, but invested in a future for these people that were diverted to these extremists to build tunnels underground and rockets to fire overground, and nobody's talking about that, right? That's because going back to the ignorance and the shallow understanding among college students, because they see what looks like an unmatched war, they're identifying with the perceived victims. These are kids who are being accepted to Ivy League schools. What has happened to this generation? Where are the adults in the room? Why can't a president of the University of Pennsylvania say, yes, it's tricky, maybe it's a slippery slope. I know there's a First Amendment in this country. There are people in this room, lawyers, who can speak to that better than I can. But, free speech is one thing. Hate speech is another. This is poisoning this country, poisoning these people.
And it doesn't bother these college kids. There's no gay rights, no women's rights. I'm sure, if that were happening here, oh my God. That doesn't bother them.
Somebody
It's the whole Arab world, right? Things like that.
somebody suggested that we buy, one-way tickets for some of these kids who identify as, as gay or members of the LGBTQ community. One-way ticket, to Gaza, and let's see,
I'm in favor of that.
All right, well,
Isn't that a happy note?
Yeah, somehow,
Isn't that a happy
I was
note
trying to think that we
end
can end on a more upbeat note here, but we do so appreciate you coming. We so appreciate your energy, your passion, your knowledge, and thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. We are making a donation, as I mentioned, to the 2023 Israel Emergency Fund, and this fund provides urgently needed assistance to the people of Israel. So with that, thank you all for attending, and I look forward to seeing you at our next lecture. That's all. Thank Linda. Thank you so much. So eloquent.
I have to ask you, when you mentioned the Attorney General, is that Philip Solinger?
It's Matt Platkin.
Offer thanks to Shelley Young for bringing this program together,
Oh,
for
thank you.
preparing so well, obviously, for this program.
Thank you.
You really made
Thanks, made up for the years, I guess, I was with CNN,
Whatever.
right?
In the end, there you go.
You're amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, my
Thank you very
pleasure.
much.
Thank you for your interest and for your great questions and.
Did you know Anderson?